Okay, today is Tuesday, July 13th. It is 7:04 p.m., and I will call the regular meeting of the Common Council of the City of Platteville to order. We are in the council chambers. This is the first meeting we've had in these chambers as a council since March 24th of 2020, which is 464 days ago. I hope you all notice that there have been changes. I mean, I don't know how you couldn't notice there have been changes since we all used to sit over there and now we're sitting here. And we have a beautifully restored floor and an incredibly beautiful new podium. Shannon Butson, our building maintenance specialist, spent countless hours on both tasks. Let me tell you, I can't imagine that his knees don't hurt yet from the amount of time he spent on this floor pulling nails from the floor. But Candace, we'll start with roll call.
Jason Arts.
Here.
Isaac Shanley.
Here.
Eileen Nichols.
Here.
Kathy Kopp.
Here.
Barbara Doss.
Here.
Ken Killian.
Yeah.
Okay, our first item is a presentation on the 2020 audited financial statements by Johnson & Black. Nicola, do you want to do the introduction?
So we have with us tonight Brent Nelson, who is the partner with Johnson Block, who is the firm that conducts our audit. And we're excited to be able to actually have him here in person. And so Brent has a presentation that he's going to give you that summarizes the very lengthy audit report that you received in the packet and now have a hard copy on your desks also. Did you have a question, Ken?
Yeah, Ken?
Yes, my question is, with the audit people, was there a group of people from the staff that met with them? So for example, did you meet with them? Did Sheila meet? And did any council member meet with the audit people?
So yes, we spent much time together with Johnson Block staff. And the lead for the audit, the field work that takes place actually here in City Hall. Her name is Quinn. She's not here tonight, but I spent a considerable amount of time with Quinn and the finance team, even more time with Quinn and her team. But as far as council members meeting with the auditors,
Ken, I had a conversation with the auditors. They called me and I had a conversation with the auditors.
Well, I remember in the past, it used to be a council member met with the people.
Well, I
I
guess,
was just wondering.
yeah. I guess you could say I met since I had a conversation. It wasn't in person, but it was a meeting.
But it wasn't continually.
No, I wasn't involved in the entire time period, no.
I think Brent can speak to this too. I think it's part of the audit controls to speak with a member of the council leadership.
Yep, sure. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Brent Nelson, audit partner with Johnson Block. Yeah, a required audit procedure is we connect with a member of the city council, any village board, any governance board for any audit we do. We're required to have go through some standard inquiries and ask if there's specific things they want us to look at. But there is a conversation. Sometimes it's more at the front end of the audit. Sometimes it's closer toward the end. But there is certainly a conversation before we issue the audit with a governing board member. Commonly, sometimes it's maybe a finance chair, finance committee chairman. We rotate it. It's not always the same person every year. But certainly any member of the Common Council can reach out to us throughout the year.
Thank you.
So, yeah, and a little bit on timeline, kind of the audit's been structured. We're on site in either late February, early March. We focus on the utility side of things because the PSC report that the water utility and joint utility with the sewer is generally due at the end of March. So we're on site at the end of February, early March, and then we come back and do the focus on the city side of things in mid to late April and early May. It's kind of our timeline. Then we ultimately issued the audit here in late June. So my focus tonight is going to be to review just a high level of the 2020 audit. I did see the electronic 80-page audit report did get sent out with the audit, with the packet, and then hard copies were provided to the Common Council tonight. So, and I have a copy here myself if there are any specific questions, but my plan was to focus on the high-level PowerPoint tonight. And the management and the Common Council should have a hard copy of this that the public can look at the PowerPoint, but some of the tables might get small to read from a distance, so I apologize for that. But we've completed the 2020 audit. We issued our report in late June. We issued unmodified opinions, which is a good thing, basically that we believe the audited financial statements are in all material respects in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. So that's the highest level of opinion that we can offer. The scope of our audit included all the activities of the city, so there'd be the city, utility, the TIF districts, the housing authority, all that's within the scope of the city of Platteville's audit. Before we issued the final report, we sent drafts to management to review and approve before we finalized everything. In addition to the audit, we also do some regulatory reports on the city's behalf. I mentioned the Water Sewer Utility PSE annual report, the Public Service Commission. Prior to mid-2020, the sewer utility, as you're probably all aware, deregulated. So we had to change our presentation of the sewer utility. We're still going to report a joint combined utility. It's just the sewer part is non-regulated, which required some changes. So we had to tweak some things with the 2020 report, but going forward, it should be streamlined. And then in addition to that, we do the municipal financial report that gets reported to the Department of Revenue. One new thing that came up this year is with all of the federal money received by the city, somewhat unexpectedly, the city is required to have a single audit. This means if the city receives more than $750,000 of federal awards flowing through the city, it triggers what's called a single audit. It's an additional add-on compliance audit. And we didn't identify that until probably after the final field work in early May. We started to tally up, okay, the airport got some federal funds, the museum got some federal funds, and then we ended up adding it all up, and sure enough, the city just barely snuck over that $750,000 threshold. So some of that work will probably be done remotely, but there is some additional 2020 work we'll have to wrap up here after today. The last time the city had a single audit was 12/31/15. So it's been, 5 years or so. But yeah, the big driver of that was the COVID, the CARES funding, with the taxi and the bus, the federal government up there, what they were covering for the cost, so there was less city share. So when we tallied it all up, it was over the 750. So the city's not alone in that. I think you might have to have a single audit here for potentially the foreseeable future now with the American Rescue Plan. So it's new for this year, but it might be a continuing thing here for a couple years after this year. So it's not too scary. I think the city staff will be fine with it, but it is new. Just some overall 2020 financial highlights. The governmental funds, the city has 15 to 20 governmental funds. There's the big one, the general fund, capital projects fund. Each TIF district has its own fund. Then there's some smaller ones. Just the largest fund increase is overall across the city, excluding the utilities. Overall fund balance in 2020 increased by roughly $400,000. The breakdown by individual fund, the general fund increased by $226,000 in 2020. The affordable housing fund increased $214,000. So that was a brand new fund in 2020 as a result of the closure of TIF District Number 4. The city took advantage of a 1-year extension. So that fund balance increase was driven by that final year of increment in TIF 4. Capital projects fund decreased by a little over $200,000. Capital projects kind of fluctuates year to year based on when borrowings occur, when those are spent. So that decrease of $200,000, that capital project fund does fluctuate between years. And then TIF district number 6 increased by roughly $141,000. The general fund on an overall basis reported favorable variance to the compared to the budget. So actual revenues came in higher than expected. Actual expenditures were less than budgeted. So overall favorable against the budget, the actual results. The net position of the water sewer utility increased by $565,000. So strong net income there. And that might get tough to see on the slideshow, but the hard copy, hopefully you can see all right. But just looking at the 5-year trend and just looking at just the general fund balance, there's different classifications of fund balance. So fund balance is your assets less your liabilities. What's left is fund balance. There's different classifications of it. Total fund balance, just looking at the going down to the bottom, overall the general fund balance has been pretty steady over the last 5 years, ranging from anywhere from 4 million to 4.5 million, and there's a line graph that shows that breakdown. So the total shows that total fund balance at the top has been pretty steady overall. What has fluctuated though is the different classifications of fund balance. Non-spendable is what it sounds like. It's an asset, say, of the city, but it's not money in the bank. You can't go spend it. So you'll see there's a dip from 2018 down to 2019 where non-spendable fund balance went down quite a bit. And basically, and what that was TIF number 7 still owes the general fund some money, but it used to owe a lot more money to the general fund. And TIF number 7, in part with getting that revenue sharing from TIF number 5, has been able to pay down how much it owes the general fund. So what happens is that formerly non-spendable fund balance turns into unassigned. That frees it up to be spent in the general fund. So overall total fund balance didn't change. Has steadily increased, don't get me wrong, anywhere from around 5% annually. But the big driver of the change has been that non-spendable fund balance turning into unassigned. Restricted and assigned fund balance, there are different classifications. Those are where they're either restricted either externally by, say, a donor restricted fund, or assigned internally earmarked for specific purposes. But overall, total general fund balance has been pretty steady the last 5 years. The city does have a fund balance policy where it wants its unassigned fund balance to be 20% of annual expenditures. That's the city's policy, and that's a common benchmark for municipalities to use. So the bottom table is comparing what unassigned fund balance is at that 20% to what it actually was for those 5 years. And you can see that consistently the city's unassigned fund balance has been over that threshold, even has been steadily increasing. The year for 2020 unassigned fund balance was roughly 40% of 2020 current year expenditures. Just looking at general fund revenues, a 3-year trend in revenues, starting with 18 on the left to 2020 on the far right. The biggest chunk of the city's general fund revenues is intergovernmental sources, federal and state funding, some local county funding as well. About 4.1 million of 2020 general fund revenue was from intergovernmental sources, making up over half of the general fund's actual revenues for the year. And you'll notice the spike up in 2020 over 19 was a lot of that COVID funding, the CARES funding, both received by the city and that went through the museum. So that big spike in intergovernmental revenue is that increased federal funding, which is now translated in that compliance audit that's now required. Public charges for services and fines were down. Fines and forfeit revenues were down in 2020 compared to 2019. And I've been seeing that pretty much across the board for all municipalities with pools closing, with limited parks and rec activities. We've been seeing those revenues go down, fines with less parking violations, things like that when the quarantine was occurring in 2020. Just a trend in the taxable value of property within the city of Platteville here in the last 5 years, and you'll see, based on the line graph, it has been a steady increase over the past 5 years. The annual increases in equalized value of the city of Platteville have increased anywhere from 2% to closer to 5%, but steady increases here over the last 5 years. 2020 net new construction was $1.6 million, so comparing 2020 net new construction to 2019 equalized value, increase of about 0.2% or 0.23%, and that's a big number because the city can increase its base tax levy based on the new construction that occurs within the city. The 2021 equalized values will be available here next month already, mid-August. Just turning to general fund expenditures, again, 3-year look. Overall, 2020 expenditures were down. The total for 2020 was about 8.4 million compared to over 8.7 million for 2018 and 2019. The big driver of that was with leisure activities, kind of goes hand in hand with revenues. Less pool, parks and rec activities. So some of the reason for that decrease in leisure activity in 2020 versus the prior years. But the biggest part of the general fund's budget is public safety, making up about 38% of the general fund budget. That's your police, fire, building inspection. The second biggest part is the leisure activities. Even with some decreases, with less going on in 2020, it still made up the second biggest part of the general fund actual expenditures. And a lot of, just comparing the expenses between years, multiple functions were impacted by the COVID shutdowns. Mentioned leisure with the pool, conservation and development was down, room taxes were down, and a part of that room tax revenue gets transmitted to the room tax entity that promotes tourism. And then transfers at the bottom, I just thought I mentioned the transfers, so that's where the general fund's transferring funds to other funds. Transfers for the past 3 years has hovered around $500,000, and the majority is that the general fund transferring funds to the capital projects funds to be used for capital purposes. Just switching gears a little bit, focusing away from the governmental funds to the utility. Haven't talked too much about the utilities at this point, but a 5-year trend of the utility revenues and expenses. So this is a combined water and sewer utility that the city has. 2020 revenues of roughly $4.7 million. Comparing that to the expenses of about $4.2 million, so roughly $511,000 net income for 2020. So down from what it was the prior 3 years. From 2017 to 2019, the net income of the utility had been in excess of $900,000. 2020 utility revenue was down as a whole. Part of public, I mentioned it here, public authority revenue was down, which a big driver of that is with the public school closures, the university closures, which impacted utility revenues there. So part of the decrease net income is just with revenues being down, and expenses were up somewhat as well with the water tower painting happened in 2020. But overall, the net income was down compared to the last 3 years. Water utility rate of return from the PSC report was 3.76%, which is still a pretty strong return, kind of the benchmark rate of return that the PSC establishes as 4.9%. But with those decreased revenues and increased expenses, that the city's water utility had been over 5%. So this year's is down from what it was. Sewer utility rate of return from the PSC report was 4.93%, and that was possibly skewed because we only had half a year activity because that deregulation happened in July 14th. So we had to break the revenue and expense down from that point in time and split it up. But roughly the revenues and expenses, it's a combined utility, but roughly 50% of the revenue is water, 50% sewer. It's a pretty even split, 50-50, what utilities makes up the total combined utility. Any questions with any of the financial thing? I just have one kind of last slide on the financials. Looking at long-term debt obligations. So these are things that are going to be paid off over multiple years, from 10 to 20 years down the road. Governmental activities would be TIF districts, general fund, capital projects fund. Beginning balance would be going into 2020, what was outstanding for long-term debt. Increases would be any new debt issued during the year, and decreases would be principal payments during the year. Overall, for the governmental activities, the net decrease, there was a net decrease in long-term debt of roughly $400,000 in the long-term debt. Business type activities that's the utility, so that's the water and sewer. So water and sewer utility increased in long-term debt obligation by about $560,000. There's a new borrowing outpaced the principal payments on the existing borrowings. Wisconsin state statutes limit how much general obligation debt a municipality can issue. They limit it at 5% of the equalized value of the property in the city. So the general obligation debt limit that the city had was $36,305,000, comparing that to what the city actually had outstanding of $20,500,000. So there is roughly $16 million of capacity there that the city could issue if it ever needed to, but certainly not saying issue new debt necessarily, but there is capacity there to issue new debt. Just some overall conclusions, I guess, to recap. City fund balance was healthy, exceeded the minimum over the last 5 years, minimum fund balance policy. There's debt capacity should the city need or want to issue new debt. Utility rates of return have been providing an adequate rate of return to support operations, pay down debt, and meet capital improvement needs. In conjunction with the audit, we're required to issue a standard audit communications document that was in the board packet, and you have a hard copy of that tonight. I wasn't going to go over that. It's a lot of standard communication. Appreciate everybody, all the city staff's help throughout this process. It's been a long 16 months, and we've made it all work, and we appreciate everybody's help throughout this process. I take any questions. Otherwise, thanks for having me tonight and letting us be of service.
Okay, does anybody have questions that they want to pose to Brent? Ken?
My question is, looking at the state of Wisconsin, are there water and sewer utilities that have a better return or better balance as far as debt? I'll say debt, as compared to Platteville. Are they not spending the money to keep up, or what's going on?
I'd say Platteville's debt ratio, its leverage, how much debt it has issued, is pretty common to what I see for other cities the size of the city of Platteville. I don't have the statistics right in front of me, and that's something maybe I could send to Nicola that could for it. But the PSC does provide some statistics. Okay, here's what the city of Platteville's debt leverage is compared to assets, and then it compares it to a state average. So I don't have those statistics in front of me, but overall I feel like Platteville is right around what I've seen with other municipalities its size.
Thank you.
Anybody else with any questions? Well, thank you, Brent, and it's always good to hear that you find our city staff to be as helpful as they are to us. And so thank you to you and your team, and to Nicola and her team for bringing us through this review of our finances.
Thank you.
I think definitely I just want to give kudos to all of our city staff. I mean, I think if you recall when we presented, it was back in July of last year, we were showing the potential for the city with everything going on with COVID of being potentially, over $500,000 in the hole. So I think it's a kudos to definitely the direction of everybody of our staff who really hunkered down and, watched expenditures and went after grants and went after opportunities. And what this, financial data shows is the city of Platteville, we're headed in the right direction. We have a very healthy, we have a good fund balance, and those are conversations that we'll be able to have as we start going into the budget process this year about, some potential opportunities that we haven't had in the past to kind of look at doing things differently or looking at some different opportunities. So again, just kudos to everybody in this room, everybody with, obviously our auditors and Ellers who have been helping us through definitely some crazy times. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty. The next item on our agenda is consideration of the consent calendar. The following items may be approved on a single motion and vote due to their routine nature. Please indicate if you prefer separate discussion or action on any item. First, we have the council minutes from June 22nd's regular meeting. We have the payment of bills. We have our financial report for June. Appointments to boards and commissions. Tonight I have 4. Bob Stoffaker, to a 5-year term ending after the 2026 session of the Board of Review. To the Historic Preservation Commission as an alternate, Fritz Doman, to a 3-year term ending May 1, 2024. To the Parks, Forestry, and Recreation Committee, Victoria Hundhausen. Her term would end on June 1st, 2022. And to the Task Force on Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity, Akshay Sukwal, who we met tonight, and Julie Stevenson, who works at Southwest Health. Additionally, we have licenses, temporary Class B, license to serve fermented malt beverages to the Platteville Main Street program for the July monthly mingle, which is tomorrow night, Wednesday, July 14th, from 4 to 6:30. We have some 1- and 2-year operator licenses to serve and sell alcohol. We have requests for street closings as follows: extend the permit hours for the farmers market until 3 p.m. on July 24th to coincide with the Hometown Festival Arts and Crafts Fair. North Bonson Street by City Park for the Chalk and Cheese Fest by the Path Group on Saturday, August 14th from 1 to 7:30. And again, extending the permit hours for the farmers market until 2 p.m. on October 30th, which coincides with Sweet Treats on Main. Hard to believe we're talking about Halloween. And the other permit would be a parade permit for the Platteville Dairy Days Parade, which is scheduled for Saturday, September 11th. That is from 9:30 to 11:30 a.m. Do I hear a motion?
I move to approve the consent calendar.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion by Ken and a second by Kathy to approve the consent calendar as presented. Candace will vote.
Arts,
Yes.
Shanley,
Yes.
Nichols, Cop,
Yes.
Doss,
Yes.
Killian.
Yes,
Motion carries.
Okay, next on our agenda are citizens' comments, observations, and petitions, if any. At this point in time, I have nobody who's registered to speak at this point. Mr. Faraday will take your comments during that part of the agenda that deals with your with that issue. So since we have nothing there, let us move on to reports. Historic Preservation Commission, Ken.
no addition,
Water and Sewer Commission.
no addition on my part.
No additions.
Nope, I have none either. Community Safe Routes, Jason.
No additions.
I would note that the Community Safe Routes Committee is looking for additional members. Is that correct?
Have to double check that.
Yep, I think so. Housing Authority Board, Ken.
No addition,
Police and Fire Commission, Kathy.
No additions.
Okay, other reports that were in your packet were the Water and Sewer Financial Report for June, the Airport Financial Report for June, a tide update prepared by Adam, and department progress reports. Any questions on any of those?
I have some questions.
Okay, Ken? On which report?
Nicola,
Nicola?
accomplishments, I just want to find out, it says, continued support and development of city clerk function. Now, we have 2 city clerks. We have a deputy and a full city clerk. So could you explain what is meant by this comment, continued support and development of city clerk function?
Sure. Over the past couple of years, we have been doing a deep dive into the various responsibilities of the office, what's been required, including the elections, of course, and issuing permits and licenses. And so we've been working, City Clerk Candace Class has been working on bringing some improvements to some of those processes. And I've been providing support on that. And also, we have been looking at the duties between those 2 positions that you mentioned, the city clerk position and the deputy clerk position. And so that's where I've been providing support in making those assessments and fine-tuning those job descriptions, and that's a work in progress that we're still continuing at this point.
Okay, next question is learned and assessed mini budget module for suitability for implementation.
Sure.
What does that mean?
Yes, so we were considering a budget module. It's called My Budget. We have a product that works in conjunction with our general ledger system that is called My Viewpoint. That's the name given to it by the vendor, and that's a portal that allows users to access data that is stored in our general ledger system without actually having to have a user license for that system. So it's a web-based program. And My Viewpoint has several facets to it. One is called the AP workflow, accounts payable workflow, which we just implemented earlier this year, which allows department directors and managers to review and approve invoices in a much more efficient process. We're doing away with shuffling paper, and we're clicking on mouses instead, or on mice, I guess. And it also enables people to work remotely, which is important in the environment that we've been in. And so we were also looking at another module that was under consideration, which we were hoping was going to enhance some of our budget processes, and particularly enable us to eliminate some time-consuming aspects of the budget document. That very large book that we produce that has earned us the GFOA Budget Presentation Award, but is pretty intensive in Excel spreadsheets and so forth. So I spent some time evaluating that module, seeing if it was going to deliver what we had hoped it would deliver, and ultimately came to the conclusion it was no, it actually was not going to give us what we had hoped for. But that's what is listed there under the accomplishments.
My next question, coordination of de-escalation training for city clerk and finance teams.
Sure. So one thing that I've been wanting to develop for the teams that I work with is providing them with opportunities for professional development. And this opportunity came through my inbox from the university, that they were providing a de-escalation training that they indicated could be adapted to particular types of industry. They had offered it for the hospitality industry, and so I had reached out and said, well, I was interested to see if they could adapt it for those members of our city staff teams that have to interact with the public on a day-to-day basis, and sometimes those interactions can be tense. We are currently going through the implementation of the disconnect process for accounts that are in arrears. And as you can imagine, that can be a difficult time for staff. And also, property taxes, not everybody is excited about paying property taxes, and so some people can come into the office and be somewhat agitated. And so we felt that this training would be an opportunity for staff to be equipped with how to serve our public to the best of their abilities, and also how to approach those situations when they do occur. So that's the de-escalation training that I've been coordinating, and which is upcoming in a couple of weeks.
Okay, thank you. My next one goes to community planning. Under accomplishments, it says here about the third bullet point down, work training and onboarding items with Mark Hicks, the new code enforcement inspector. Then I went down major objectives for the coming months. It says review applications for the code enforcement position and begin interview process. Is this the same thing?
Yeah,
You're gonna hire another half a person?
no, it's crossed out on my version. I just didn't
Well, it's
catch
not crossed out on
didn't catch it
mine.
in time before it went out. No, we have hired that position, so Mark is,
Okay.
he's been working for a couple weeks now, so.
Oh, I just thought maybe we're gonna hire another half.
No, that was an item we did discuss, but it didn't work out that way.
Okay, then my other question is, worked on property maintenance issues. What are some of the issues?
Well, most of those issues were prior to Mark starting, so, property and code enforcement I was doing a lot of that myself. Howard was doing some of that. Obviously, going through the hiring process, I think we also had some discussions with the council upgrade on some certain properties where we had some issues that we're doing some follow-up inspections on some of those.
Okay, I believe that's it. Thank you.
Hey. Anybody else with any questions?
I do have one. That's for the, he's gone, museum.
Oh, yep, Eric, I think
He's
is
gone.
gone.
My question pertained to, there were no bids for a particular contract.
Correct.
This
So I
was the
can update you on that. So
Contract.
that was for the roofing project. If you remember, that was one of the capital improvement plans that we had, which was the kind of the partnership with Grant County, where they're actually funding the majority of the project. They had an original bid date where, due to, I think, again, with some of the construction volatility issues that were going on with pricing, there was definitely interested bidders, but they didn't have all of their information. So what happened was that bidding process was redone, and the final bid day was actually the Friday, I believe. What would that have been, the 9th? Whatever last Friday was. I think that was the 9th. And I do know they did get 2 bids out of that. So right now, Grant County is reviewing those options to see if they want to move forward with one of those.
Okay, so there are some bids
Yes.
possible.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And going on with what Ken started there, I have a question with that bid processing. With that grant that we received there, is there a time limit, as in it's got to be done within, or sorry, I don't
Yes.
recall.
Yes.
If so, what was that time period?
Pretty much we have to, it can carry over into next year. That was one of the questions that we had to research, because one of the concerns we had was exactly that, was that, is there a timeline? As long as we have the bid awarded and there is some form of, work started on it, it can carry into the next year. So,
So when was the deadline for that bid? And the reason I'm saying is, so lumber on the gross has started to come down from a high down to $7.44 today.
Yep.
Which were just a little over half of what it was this time last year. And it takes about 3 months, as we talked before, for that to get to the private sector.
yep.
So if all of a sudden that entire project could be covered at one price, but now it can't because the price is so high, are we able to hold it off enough to make sure that?
Yes, so they do not have to. They are not required to. They can basically deny any bid that they get. They have that ability, and essentially both. There is a cap that they have as far as the funding that was available. My understanding is, from the emails that I received, is one of the bids they received are under that cap. So that's something that's kind of what they're doing now, is the due diligence period of reviewing the bids that came in, and the ones that are over and under, they kind of have to review to see, as you kind of indicated, if there's changes that potentially they would need to make or want to make. That's kind of the period they're in right now.
Okay, so this was the CDBG closed funds
Correct.
that were available at the county level, and we competed with another, I think there's a project.
There's 2 projects that were funded out of it,
Right.
correct?
Right. So, and this is running through Grant County Economic Development.
Yes, so basically it has to go through, it has to go to the county level. The county has to formally make a decision. They can either accept one of the bids, they can
Right.
deny it, they can change it. And that's kind of the process they're in right now, is my understanding through the email chains, is they're looking at kind of reviewing the bids that came in.
So, my point in bringing that up is that we won't ever see and/or approve that bid. That it will go
Correct,
through.
that'll go through the county level.
I mean, I think you'll keep us
Well, yes.
informed
Yep.
about what the bid is and how that's going. But this is not a bid that we'll be reviewing.
Correct.
Because it's not money that we actually
Right.
have access to
Yeah.
spend. It's
The
not-
where it would come back to the council for consideration is if both, however many bids that were received and reviewed, if all of them were above the kind of cap, that then becomes a question for the city of Platteville is do we want to supplement the difference?
Yep. Okay. Then, any other questions on progress reports? Then let's move into our action agenda. The first is Resolution 2112, repeal and recreation of, why didn't that work? Well, Howard, instead of going to your thing, I get the library report when I do that. But anyway, Howard,
Okay, thank you. Yes, back in January, February, we worked with the DOT regarding what they call the functional classification of streets in urban areas. The last time we did this was in 2005. They break the classifications into different areas like interstate highways, principal arterials, minor arterials, collectors, and local roads. They like to break them down based on traffic volume, land use, and things like that. Originally, when we did this earlier in the year, they were concerned about Milton Longhorn Drive being owned by the university. Our Wisconsin DOT felt that this was a private street and could not be granted that status. Federal Highway Administration basically overruled them, said that since it's a public university using public funds to own and maintain that road, that it should be classified accordingly. And so it is being eligible to be designated as a minor arterial. It does not increase our state aids. What it does is it identifies those streets that are local for different federal and state aid programs, like that multimodal local supplement program of last year. And I believe the governor signed the bill that they will have another round of that coming up this year. I think this is a good thing. It's more housekeeping than anything else. I would just recommend approval. That's the only change from what we had back earlier this year, was Longhorn Drive and the couple of streets that connect to it, Greenwood Avenue and College Drive.
okay, question, anybody with a question? If there are no questions, is anybody ready to offer any motion?
Make a motion to approve Resolution 21-12, the repealing of the Resolution 21-02, and the recreation of the updates to the functional classification of the streets in Platteville.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion by Isaac and a second by Eileen and Kathy at the same time, but we'll take Eileen's. Candace will vote.
Arts,
Yes.
Shanley,
Yes.
Nichols. Yes. Cop,
Yes.
Doss,
Yes.
Killian.
Yes,
Motion carries.
Okay, the next item on our agenda then is, we have several here. Nicola, are you handling all of these resolutions for,
So, well, I'll get us kicked off. One of our municipal advisors from Ehlers is here. This is Brian Wimmer, and he is going to also walk through the reports that he provided that are in your packet. I just wanted to give you kind of a 5,000-foot overview to get us started, and let you know, in reference to what our usual experience is with bond issues for the city of Platteville. So this year, we actually have 3 separate bond issues, and items B, C, D, and E relate to the street CIP and stormwater Deborah Court CIP. That was part of our 2021 budget. And that issuance is general obligation bonds. And so those do count towards the debt capacity that Brent referenced, the 5% of equalized value. And then we also have a water and sewer CIP bond issue. That is item F, Resolution 2117. And then finally, part of the services that Ehlers provides is to assess our debt portfolio each year to see if there's any opportunities to save some money, save some money by refinancing or refunding bonds that are available to be refunded due to market conditions, interest rates. And so Resolution 2118 is providing for the sale of taxable water and sewer revenue refunding bonds to refund a 2012 bond issue, which will result in savings, and Brian can explain more about those details. And so that's why we have 3 different bond issues that we're looking at. And due to timing, we wanted to, first of all, it saves us a little bit of money if we can work on these bond issues simultaneously, particularly with Ehlers themselves and also with S&P on the ratings that they issue. And also because we wanted to try to take advantage of the current marketplace with interest rates before things might change. So that's why that we have all 3 coming before you at the same time. In each of the reports that Ehlers has provided, you'll see that there is a timeline there that explains when our S&P ratings call will be and when this will come back before the council for approval of the bids and so forth. And with that, and I just wanted to mention that because each of these is a different resolution, we will need to have a motion on each resolution as indicated in the staff report. And with that, I will hand over to Brian. Thank you, Brian.
You did a good job. I can head home. Just kidding. I'll jump into those details and provide a little further scope on each of those, because I think it's important to understand kind of why we're doing 3 at one time instead of just 1. If you'll note from previous years, we typically do kind of a geo and then a revenue. So I'll just kind of jump into that real quick. The reason that we typically divide those up is because, one, you have an established revenue source in the utilities, and you have a good rating with those utilities as well. So what that means is basically you're a credit-worthy entity. You get a high credit score on your personal side, you get a good mortgage rate. Same goes for bonds. So when that happens, you can avoid hitting your geo debt limit by issuing revenue bonds. Because you typically got only 2 real routes of pledges there when you're issuing debt. You can issue on a GO basis or general obligation. What that means is you're pledging the levy ability of the city, and you're going to be repaying that through levy dollars. You can certainly issue GO debt for water and sewer purposes and then abate that levy. The problem there is you are hitting that GO debt limit. So, for example, on the new money portion, action item F, if we were to add $2.4 million to the GO portion, then we're increasing your kind of how close you're getting to that cap. And you have not only the state statutory cap of 5%, which Mr. Nelson went through in the audit process, but you have kind of a self-restricting cap at 3.5%. So, which is a good practice, which is why you have a good rating, et cetera. So, just kind of understanding why we split the issuances typically between GO and revenue. The other thing I'll add before I kind of jump into the paperwork would be when Nicola explains that we're looking at your refunding opportunities, the only thing I'll correct there is we actually do that quarterly, and then we also do that any time that you're issuing debt. So we look at the full picture. In addition to, we also have been conducting more regular financial management planning sessions with you guys over the past 3 or 4 years. So when we're doing that as well, we're also looking at those refunding opportunities. So truly, it's kind of been bi-monthly, specifically for the city of Platteville in terms of looking at those refunding opportunities. So I'll kind of jump into those market conditions as we go, but I just want to kind of tackle those high-level items first. So the reason that you see 4 different action items on the GO side is because when you're issuing bonds, you actually have to do it by purpose. So the two purposes here are the streets and the sewer. And then as a city, you have to have that public notice to the electors. So just understand why you have the three extra instead of just one resolution. It's kind of statutorily required there. But that said, I'll jump into the geo portion. So
Brian, if I can just clarify too,
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure the council understands the terminology used here. So our bond council uses the term sewerage. What they're referencing there is the stormwater project, which is Deborah Court.
correct. So looking at starting with Nicola's memo that's in your packet, the next page would be our report for the geo portion. So that has our logo on it. It says the 2,005,000 in general obligation corporate purpose bonds. The first couple pages is what you might be accustomed to. That kind of explains the transaction in an executive summary format. So it just identifies what you're issuing for. Nicola's kind of already gone over that. But specifically, I think the first thing to highlight beyond what Nicola's identified here is looking under the authority. Certainly, we want to make sure that you are able to issue this debt, and it's kind of run-of-the-mill general obligation purposes. But that said, we're also looking at your debt limit, and so specifically, kind of honing in on those numbers. You're at about 60% of this limit, with a remaining capacity of 14.4 million left over. So we have a chart that'll kind of show what that looks like in the future, kind of looking at as you amortize debt and how that will go down as you amortize debt, but it certainly stands to reason. You do have an annual CIP, so you're going to be issuing debt, and we typically recommend in the financial management planning process to try to issue debt in the amount that you're amortizing each year to kind of keep that debt limit basically flat as much as you can. Now, certainly things come up that, you may have to issue debt for to go above, where you've been. But that said, I think you're at a healthy position that's been borne out by the results of these rating releases each time we issue debt. The next important feature, still just below that, would be the term and call feature. I just want to make sure you understand. So anytime we're issuing debt with you guys, we're looking to get it so you have that financial flexibility to change the structure or seek savings, kind of like what we're doing in the last issue tonight. But so the geo issue and all of them are going to have a call feature on March 1st of 2030 or any date thereafter. So that's about the typical range right now where you're seeing the market not punish you with higher interest rates. The underwriters are giving you about that 8 to 9 year window that they want of uncallable debt and the remaining being callable debt. So you'll see that consistently through these reports. So I'm not going to hit it in the B and the C issue, but just understand you will have that financial flexibility to call that debt should you see the need to. But understand, obviously, we're in a pretty historic low interest rate environment right now. So it'd be hard to see a savings purpose, but certainly you could structure out something if need be at a later time. So you want that flexibility. The other components that are important to hit on the next page is just talking about the rating. So you currently have a AA minus, which is in a very high rating with Standard & Poor's. We're expecting similar results. What we've been seeing with other clients, specifically in reaction to COVID, it's kind of how did it affect you, specifically when we look at communities with universities in them. We also work for Whitewater, for example. We've been seeing their understanding in terms of the rating agency, understanding what's been going on with COVID and the city's ability to kind of navigate that. I think the audit and what Mr. Ruckel described after the audit is that the city's done a good job of managing the COVID crisis and kind of making sure that the finances are on the uptick. I think the major thing that the rating agencies are looking at would be your fund balance, and it was good to see that report, kind of that 5-year trend when you start to see that go up. That's what we've been kind of honing in the financial management plans. It's clearly what city staff is actually executing on their daily job. So I think once again another kudos to the staff and the decisions that you guys are making to make sure that happens. With that said, we'd kind of expect a similar result in terms of the rating. But we do have a rating call scheduled in there. As Nicola identified, there's kind of a scheduled timeline here as we progress through these financings. That said, because of the high rating and the high demand then for your debt, the way that we've been selling your general obligation bonds and revenue bonds, and are going to continue to do so and recommending to do so with this issuance, would be through a competitive bid process where we're soliciting bids no different than when you bid a public project. You're looking to make sure that you kind of get the lowest costs of what the market's willing to pay that day that you decide to issue the debt. So you've had great success in that. We provide staff with a post-pricing analysis that compares how other communities are doing should they choose not to do that through that mechanism. And in the last 3 years, this form of selling bonds has proven to provide you the lowest cost of financing, in that you're letting the market dictate how low they're willing to go, essentially. So with that said, I'll kind of jump into the high notes of the numbers, unless anybody has any questions on schedule or kind of mechanics of the deal. Okay, so with the numbers, I'll jump to page 7, because I think that's kind of the most important in terms of this is the impact of the debt issuance. So page 7 has, your logo on the left, our logo on the right, and then in the big black letters says projected impact of proposed projects. So this is just looking at the GO debt, not looking at the revenue debt. I'll be looking at that next. But going from left to right, we're looking at your existing debt payments, and specifically under those 5 or 6 columns, we want to focus on your net debt service levy, and then looking at your tax rate. So generally you want that to be going down. You don't want to see that going in kind of a roller coaster fashion, because generally your operating levy will kind of tick up with that net new construction number as you're allowed under levy limits. But your debt service levy, which is not covered by levy limits, you're kind of allowed to do whatever you'd please there, outside of how much debt you have outstanding. But when it comes to your annual appropriation, you're kind of allowed to have as much as you please. That said, we're seeing that go downward with your existing debt, and then we're structuring the new debt to kind of continue that trend outside of a small understanding that we're adding new money, so there's going to be a slight uptick. So I think the most important column to look at in terms of what I'm talking about when I speak to you about the structure and why we structured it the way we did would be under the projected debt service. This is about 3/4 of the way left to right. It says levy change column, and the first number you'll see there is $25,956, and that's for year 2021. So that's not something that we're impacting here with this debt issuance. This is all your existing debt. So the impact of this debt issuance on this kind of debt service levy would be that $6,325. So I think that's important to see kind of why we've structured it the way we have. In addition to that, we want to try to keep that in a level and decreasing trend, but also provide you with an advantageous form of issuance. So we've used interest rates based on recent sales and with a conservative buffer. So when we're looking at that, we're saying, can we move as much principal as possible to kind of keep that downward trend in the debt service levy, but also lower your total costs of interest there. So just understand that that's kind of the seesaw we play with when we're structuring your debt. And so right now, in terms of if, everything being equal, this is kind of the structure we'd recommend. Certainly things may change as we get towards sale day, and we may fluctuate this, but just know we're generally looking for that downward trend in debt service levy. A lot of times I get questions from decision makers saying, well, why don't you just focus on the tax rate? And the reason we typically do not focus on the tax rate, would rather focus on debt service levy, is because you have less control over your tax rate, only because it goes off of your equalized value. So if you have a dip or a reappropriation, anything like that might happen, you really have no control over the fact that the tax levy would go up. So if you can make sure that your debt service levy is going down, typically your tax rate will follow suit, as long as you're kind of staying at that equalized value, at those values in terms of the property in total with the city. So just kind of understand why we're structuring it the way we are and how we look at things when we're looking at the structure of your debt. We've provided some kind of samples for you too in terms of the impact on $100,000 of value, just so you can kind of understand, as your constituents are looking at this financing and how it impacts them, they might be able to navigate in terms of their own property value and what that impacts them. So that said, we're trying to keep that downward motion, and we have done so with this structuring. Are there any questions on structure? I know that's kind of maybe more than you wanted to hear, but I want to make sure you guys understand how we look at it. Okay. The next important page in terms of the GO would be the page 9, and that is your debt capacity. Like I said, I touched on at the issuance of this, you'll be at about that 60%, but it's important to look at your internal debt limit here, and this is what this chart tries to accomplish. So it's going to have page 9 has your Platteville logo, Eller's logo, and then big black letters says debt capacity, and we have kind of the 3 brackets. Hopefully you're seeing it in color, but if not, the top bracket would be your statutory debt limit at 5% of your total equalized value. Then your internal debt limit is the next middle bracket, looking at that 3.5% internal debt limit, and then the bottom would be your actual principal outstanding. The percentages shown within that chart is the percentage of your internal debt limit. So you're at 80% of your internal debt limit, and then stands to reason that goes down as you amortize debt. So certainly you have some more capacity starting next year as we amortize this debt. We tried to keep this at about a flat, as I indicated earlier, at that 80% for 2021. But going into next year, you'll have some additional capacity as you amortize debt. Certainly, you're seeing a good trend there. Obviously, I'm looking at a lot of quick amortization, and you have some older debt that's dropping off to help out with that. With that said, the final page kind of touches on the market conditions, and I'll use this as a general commentary on all the issues. In that, for the new money purposes, it's a good time to issue the debt, kind of taking advantage of the interest rate market. If you follow Mr. Powell's comments, the Fed chair, he tends right now to kind of sound a little scary in terms of what the interest rates might be and that they might uptick. So with that said, we have seen a little bit of up and down, to be quite honest, not too much changes, but I would say as you move into quarter 3 and into the fall, it certainly stands to reason that a lot of people may think that these interest rates are going up. That said, it's a historical kind of interest rate market. Just looking at this chart as a whole, I would say just now in general is a good time. Even if rates kind of move up in the next couple of months, it would still be a good time when you look at, this is only a 3-year trend. So that said, you typically don't see those large spikes outside of the fun we had last March with the onset of COVID. But we had a lot of up spikes, we had a lot of down spikes. And so that said, we'll navigate it as we go, like we did last year. I believe we moved a sale like a month or maybe 2 months last year to kind of get out of the storm, if you will, that was happening. So if for whatever reason a Delta variant, anything pops up with COVID, we'll be ready to adapt again. Just understand what you're approving tonight in terms of all of these resolutions is just the green light to kind of move forward with the sales, and then at a not to exceed level. So this is kind of the highest amount that you could issue for. We could certainly downsize this as we get closer to the sale, and looking at definitely what the underwriter does in terms of the lowest bidder, and then also if there's for whatever reason a decision or later decision to use cash to downsize. But I'm just letting you know what you're approving tonight is not actually the actual dollar amount. We could move that down. So just kind of understand that's why it says not to exceed in your resolutions. And typically we show these with kind of a no cash or anything like that in the initial resolution, so that you have that flexibility to move down should the interest rate change. Say maybe we use a little bit of cash. We want that flexibility for you guys. So are there any questions on the GO?
Any questions on the general obligation? This borrowing would be supported by tax levy.
Correct.
Questions? Okay, if there are no questions, there are 4 separate motions that are needed. One would be to authorize general obligation bonds for street improvement projects to the tune of $1.86 million. Another is to adopt a resolution authorizing $150,000 for what they call sewerage projects, which is really stormwater. And then we have a resolution about directing publication of a notice to electors. And then finally, the resolution providing for the sale of not to exceed just over $2 million in general obligation corporate purpose bond series 2021A. 4 separate motions. Do I hear?
I move that we adopt resolution number 2113 in the amount of $1,860,000.
Okay. I have a motion to approve resolution 2113. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, a second by Isaac. Candace will vote.
Arts,
Yes.
Shanley,
Yes.
Nichols. Cop,
Yes.
Doss,
Yes.
Killian.
Yes,
Motion carries.
Okay, how about resolution 2114? This would be authorizing $150,000 in GO bonds for a stormwater project.
So moved.
second,
Okay, motion by Jason, second by Ken. Candace will vote.
Arts,
Yes.
Shanley,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Cop,
Yes.
Doss,
Yes.
Killian.
yes,
Motion carries.
Next, resolution 2115, directing the publication of a notice to electors relating to both of these bond issues.
So moved.
Second. Motion by Isaac, second by Eileen. Candace will vote.
Arts,
Yes.
Shanley,
Yes.
Nichols, Cop,
Yes.
Doss,
Yes.
Killian.
yes,
Motion carries.
And resolution 21-16, providing for the sale of not to exceed $2,010,000 in general obligations corporate purpose bonds series 2021A.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion by Jason, a second by Eileen. We'll vote.
Arts,
Yes.
Shanley,
Yes.
Nichols, Cop,
Yes.
Doss,
Yes.
Killian.
yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, we will now move on to the next 2, which are water and sewer system revenue bonds.
Yep. Nicola, did you want to?
No, I think it's summarized overall, just to say
Right.
that in the staff note there, you can see the detailed breakout of what these bonds are funding for sewer CIP. And I'll head over to Brian to go through some details.
Thank you. So I'll jump into the report, and I'm going to kind of talk about these in all the same vein, not kind of break it up, because truthfully they're both the same pledge. We've just decided to break it out because when they were combined, in order to combine it, both issues would have to be taxable, because C is a taxable purpose because you're actually refunding this before its call date. When we're looking at potentially waiting until the call date, you're obviously exposing yourself to some interest rate risk there. And so when we look at this refunding and doing it what's called a taxable advance refunding, that purpose is taxable. If you were to add the new money to it to kind of realize some efficiencies in terms of the initial cost of issuance, then all of those new money purposes now have the interest rate that the taxable portion does. Taxable interest rates are higher than tax exempt. The reason for that is because on the investor side, who are going to be ultimately the secondary and probably tertiary market buying the bonds, they don't get the affordability of the tax exemption on their income taxes. So for that purpose, that taxable bonds come with a higher interest rate. And when we combined both issues, we looked at provided numbers to city staff looking at both a combined issue and a separate issue. It was more expensive for the city to do so in whole on a combined basis, so we've split these into a tax exempt for the new money purpose and a taxable for the refunding purpose. The $400,000 that you're saving, and I'll show you that table in a minute, on the taxable side is significant. That can help the water and sewer utility mitigate their future rate adjustments that are needed, or help them take on more projects should those come on. So as you probably know, utilities are very volatile in terms of operating and maintenance expenses, mainly because of those maintenance expenses. When you have a main break or a water tower painting or anything like that, it can certainly skyrocket your annual operating budget. But you're also looking at a capital intensive business operation that you're supplying 24/7 round the clock, safe, reliable drinking water and release of that water. So with that said, those pipes in the ground are not cheap. The treatment of that water to provide that safe water is not cheap. So that said, you want to be able to seize these opportunities when we can. $400,000 is not insignificant. And how we've structured that is in later years, understanding that as we build the CIP for future years, we may be able to take advantage and build in some future debt if needed. If not, it just provides that mitigation of your sewer rates and water rates. So just kind of understand why I'm talking about them in the same vein, but they are truly two different actions, because we're going to be two different debt transactions. Here we're going to be getting a rating on both. We're going to be selling them the same way as a competitive sale, just like the GO debt. So nothing's really changed there. They both are going to have the same 8 to 9 year call, as those are not, interest rate punishable. So I'm not going to really hit any of the executive summary. It's done on the same schedule as the GO, so really not too much different there. What the important thing to kind of understand is how this impacts the water and sewer utilities. So I'll kind of jump to those pages unless anybody has a question on why 2, not 1. Okay.
Go ahead.
So looking, let me just get to the page here. Excuse me. First page I want to cover is actually a little bit of ways in, but table 4, it's on either the B or the C report, but it'll be table 4 that's labeled current refunding analysis, estimated savings. If you can see that page.
It's on page 297 of your packet, if you're looking at it electronically.
This page will show you the issue that we're refunding and those future debt service payments that would happen if you did nothing, and then the proposed debt service payments, and then the savings between the two. So that said, you have about 6.188 million of future debt service if you do nothing, and about 5.629 million of future debt service if you were to refund these issues. You may a column about 7/8 of the way left to right that says prior issue debt service funds. Just understand that that's saying you've already budgeted for your interest payment that will happen here in November. And so we're not going to be borrowing for something that you've already allocated funds from the utilities for. So we're netting that out. We're not using that and not adding that to the issuance. So that's 86,500 essentially in the positive. When we look at the total savings, we've structured this a little aggressively, I would say, on the front half, and there's kind of a purpose for that. It's trying to show you what I feel is the maximum savings you can achieve with this structure, while still maintaining the creditworthiness of the coverage that your revenues provide. So I've gone over it in the utilities committee meetings when we go over those utility portion of the FMP. But the most important thing to understand when you're looking at a utility in kind of a financial creditworthiness is that debt coverage. What that's saying is basically, do we have revenues that can keep the lights on and pay our debt service? So it's just following the cash. You're saying we have these revenues coming in, we're netting out our cash expenses, including the operating side, and basically saying how many dollars do we have to pay for debt service. The next table shows that, but before I get into it, I just want to say we've obviously just had the 2020 numbers come out, so that table's going to change. That said, you're basically at about $1.50 of coverage for every dollar of debt service, which I think is the minimum that you should be at. So I would say if we decide to restructure this, and we certainly have the time to do so, we would back that off. Just understand that if we're backing off principal to later years, you'll have less savings there, because the positive years at the end would get more debt service. So I just kind of wanted to show the most aggressive structure that I would recommend. But as we get closer to sale day, we'll be talking with city staff and trying to look at, all right, do we want to mitigate some of those early years? Let's look at the CIP items for the future. Are we issuing debt next year for the utilities? Are we looking at maybe using cash as part of this transaction too? So like I said, with the GO side, it's same applies. We want kind of not show any cash here because it's the not to exceed amount that's important. You'd rather be high than low in this initial resolution stage that you're taking action on tonight. So just understand kind of the reasoning there. The total savings that you'd realize is about 400, just under 480,000, so not insignificant. We would highly recommend executing both B, obviously for the reasons of you've budgeted for this, you want to tackle those projects this year and get the money to pay for those projects. C, we're recommending because of the savings that you're potentially realizing here, understanding there could be some slight changes in the interest rates in the next couple weeks when you get to sale day. And then the last thing is, if you just are wanting to know what the rounding part is that's the extra portion to get to the $5,000 blocks that you need to sell this in. We've gone over 5,000, so normally that's under 5,000, if that makes sense, because we're trying to get to that 5,000 a block. It's over 5,000 only because of a fun little thing called slugs, which is state and local government securities. And when you do a taxable advance refunding, you have to hold those funds escrow until your call date. So you basically invest those. Typically you do that in the slugs because it's kind of a very liquid, very safe investment option up until the point that you refund it. That window is now closing. I would go into a long thing, but that's probably another 5 minutes, so I won't. But we want to give yourselves an option to use this rounding, so we've sized it a little higher should you have to go to open market securities as an investment side and pay for that upfront. So just understanding that we've given you that flexibility here, hoping obviously the slugs window doesn't close, but it looks like it will. So we wanted that not to exceed number once again to be at its kind of maximum recommended amount, so that we don't have to go back and come back to you guys for another initial resolution. Am I too close or too far?
It's not you.
It's not me?
No.
Okay. It's like, maybe I'm a robot, I didn't know.
So do we want to do resolution 2117 before you go to the next one?
I mean, I was just gonna tackle them both, and you can do, kind of both simultaneously before I do any
Okay.
thing.
Go to the next one then.
I was just gonna say, the tables don't change in either, so I was just gonna hit this last table and then be done. So the next page is table 5, and that's the debt service coverage. With the change to 2020, your net revenues were down a little bit. Mr. Nelson presented that with the audit, and that was mainly probably due to the university closing for COVID, not realizing those public authority revenues, while still trying to maintain the system and kind of keeping the operations as they were. So I did a quick calculation. You're at about 1.57 at a minimum here with that, even with the release of those numbers, and that's what the rating agency is going to look at. So I truthfully would call that the minimum here, and this is for both issues, just understand. So with that said, I think this is the most aggressive table. We'll talk with city staff if we want to back that off, but I just wanted to show you kind of the maximum savings, and we'll kind of tackle what we think is a fair savings versus coverage seesaw as we get closer to sale day and know the interest rates, but just kind of understand what we're doing there. And with that said, I have nothing further on either issue, so you could tackle both F and G unless you have questions for me.
Okay, any questions? Otherwise, we're preparing to talk about motions to adopt resolutions for revenue bonds for the water and sewer utility. So, do I hear any motions?
Adopt Resolution 2117, providing for the sale of $2,435,000 water and sewer.
2021B. Actually, it is a B. Okay.
Second.
I have a motion by Eileen and a second by Kathy to adopt Resolution 2117 relative to water and sewer revenue bonds. Candace will vote.
Arts,
Yes.
Shanley,
Yes.
Nichols, Cop,
Yes.
Doss,
Yes.
Killian.
Yes,
Motion carries.
And then Resolution 2118 provides for the sale of approximately 5,015,000 taxable water and sewer system revenue refunding bonds. Issue 2021C. Do I hear a motion?
Second.
Motion by Eileen, seconded by Isaac to approve Resolution 21-18. Candace will vote.
Arts,
Yes.
Shanley,
Yes.
Nichols, Cop,
Yes.
Doss,
Yes.
Killian.
yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. And I guess now you can go back to Waukesha or wherever. All right. That concludes the action items on our agenda tonight. So now we will move into the information items, the first of which is the Faraday claim. So I believe, Adam, my return to agenda back and forth tonight is putting me in the middle of library. I have no clue what's wrong.
That's the first meeting. We're all getting
I guess.
reacquainted. So obviously this is in your packet tonight as an information and discussion item. What the staff note just provides is kind of a history timeline of kind of what happened, how we got to, and currently where we're at. So just to kind of do a quick kind of scale through of the staff note. On Wednesday, November 4th, City Clerk Candace Klaus received a notice of circumstance of claim from Faraday Holdings LLC. The notice indicated on the 10th day of August 2022 a rainfall of several inches injured and damaged the real property belonging to Faraday Holdings LLC, and the rainfall continues to damage the property located at 225 Laurel Street. The claim indicates the water is undercutting the blacktop, pushing the blacktop and driveway, and pushing out a retaining wall, and otherwise damaging the real property. So when city staff received the notice of circumstance of claim, it was forwarded to the city's municipal attorney, as well as the city's general liability insurance company, which is EMC Insurance Company, for their review. What our insurance company did is they assigned Stephen A. Hawk from Lighthouse Claims Service LLC to basically review the matter further. So in December, there was a meeting that occurred between the Director of Public Works, Howard Crowfoot, myself, and Delta 3 Engineering, which is the city's engineering firm, and reviewed with Mr. Hawk kind of copies of the street and property area and previous construction projects that were done in the past. It looked at when the property was constructed. In 2017, there was kind of a major reconstruction project of Laura Street that was done, so it showcased that information. So during the months of January and February of 2021, I received correspondence from the EMC Insurance Company that they were continuing to review the matter. I received an update on Friday, February 5th, that EMC was waiting for Faraday's Holding LLC to file an official notice of the claim, and advised when the city received the notice of the claim to forward it to the EMC for their review. So back in March, we had Councilmember Shanley's community dialogue session, or kind of information session, and Mr. Faraday came to that and kind of wanted a status update of what was going on. So I worked with him and also his attorney to advise that a formal notice of claim would need to be done. So we actually received that then on Monday, April 26th. So that then was again sent to both our insurance company as well as the city attorney for their review. So what we have is Mr. Faraday obviously is in attendance tonight, and obviously is welcome to an opportunity to come to the podium and kind of talk about the concerns. There was a PowerPoint presentation that is in your packet that kind of shows the information. So just to kind of go over some of the kind of budget and fiscal information, obviously this is not something that the city has budgeted in any form or fashion or is aware of costs. So that's something that certainly would have to be taken into consideration. Council members have obviously been briefed by the insurance company and also the municipal attorney on things to kind of review in regards to this. But definitely we want Mr. Faraday to have an opportunity to kind of come in front of the council and be able to speak to any concerns that he has or provide any updates in regards to the pictures. So at this time, I will kind of pitch it over to him and give him an opportunity to come in front of you and voice any concerns or comments or questions that he might have.
I'd just like to point out that this has been, since we constructed the duplexes, my son and I, under an LLC called Faraday Holdings, own 2 duplexes. One has a 360 Ellen Street address, which is to the south of 225 Laura Street at the dead end. And this has been an ongoing problem ever since construction. And the lower portion from the driveway that comes out of the backside of 270 Ellen Street, that from that driveway down to our property, constructed the duplex, was gravel. And at that time, the street superintendent, Paul Budden, commented to me that his guys weren't going to go down there to plow it. So for, I believe it was 6 winters, I myself had to take care of plowing the city street. Also, during the summertime, spring and summer, fall, whenever we had a heavy rain, the gravel from off the street would wash onto the parking area. And I would have to go down there with my skid loader, clean it off. I believe possibly at times the city may have done it also to clean it up and bring additional gravel that would then again wash down onto there. When I would clean it off, there was so much silt and debris in it that it wasn't worthwhile to put it back on the street. I would pile it up in the right-of-way right to the, or I'm sorry, right next to the street, still in the right-of-way to the south side of Laura Street. That pile of stuff is still there. In addition to that, with the heavy rainfall, there has been consistent ruts. And if you checked your packets and looked at the video of the amount of water that runs down there, I've had to fill ruts that were approximately 12 to 16 inches deep in places and probably about 2 feet wide. Since the improvements on Ellen Street and Laura Street, the initial plan that I was shown at a public meeting for it showed 2 storm sewers that were to the west side of Ellen Street, approximately 10 feet down on either side, which would have helped the situation. It would not have eliminated it. But when the project was completed, those storm sewers have been moved up onto Ellen Street. So I still get, it's not as bad, but there's still a certain amount of water that comes down there and adds to the situation. The worst of the water basically comes from behind all the 3 lots that contain residences on 220, 240, and 270 Ellen Street, all drain out of the lower level driveway of 270 Ellen Street. That still produces a large volume of water. The neighbors will pile brush there for the city to come, and it's piled in a portion of the street. Some of those pictures I believe show debris there that washes down to my property. if you, I don't have a picture, but at one point, after speaking with different city employees about it, their feet were kind of dragging and everything. I finally contacted the DNR, and the city finally put in a little curb that's a little hump, like a drive over, that would take and direct some of the water that was running directly towards the northeast corner of our duplex. And at that time, we had 2 retaining walls there, and it would create a waterfall that was approximately at times 6 feet wide, going down over both retaining walls. And they, if you look at the pictures where you're looking in line, those retaining walls initially started out straight, and like retaining walls, they gradually stepped back. The curve came in there from the amount of water that was there. It also, there's a picture there that shows the corner of a house where we used to have a downspout. I've since rerouted them to help take care of some of the immediate water around both duplexes. But it actually settled, that blacktop used to be level with that concrete there. It settled that, and I think I have a tape measure there, but it's settled that like 6 inches. And then it moved where the downspout used to go in that white PVC. It pushed that out 6 inches. And that was out by the house. If you take into consideration the bow in the walls, it had moved quite a bit. My brother was a long-time landscaper in Platteville, and I was of the opinion he was also, and also the excavator. We've already replaced that retaining wall. We went with big cement block because the consensus was that it was already getting to the point of being dangerous. Since replacing that and having that little curb in there, all the water that was running there teamed up with the water that would run off from the other side, the south side of Laura Street. And at this point, what it's doing is the asphalt parking lot it's washing the gravel out from underneath of that. And now I'm starting to get crumbling and everything on the asphalt. With using the large concrete blocks for the retaining wall, there's a portion of the parking area that needs to be blacktop. I was waiting for a little settlage there. People I have talked to is mainly construction, and he came up with, I thought was a good idea, of along the east side of the parking lot where the water goes is to do a flume curb and gutter for the water to run in. And then as it got out in between the duplexes is to do a wider concrete flume. It has to be something that can be driven over, because that is my only access to the back, to the sides and back of the duplexes, and also for like mowing purposes and everything, and if I need to get any equipment down in there. Then his thought was, after that flume is down in the area where the city placed a large rock for riprap, would be to spread that flume out so that the water fans out and is not concentrated in one area where that riprap is, because that had, prior to the street being done and the riprap in there, had really gouged quite a mud in there that was 3 or 4 deep in that hill, 3 or 4 feet deep, I believe, in that hillside. So, but the volume of water, especially in these heavy rains that we've been getting, is just tremendous. So I guess what I would be looking for is, I'm the only person I know of, private person I know of, that has ever been forced to maintain a city street. We have an expense with the retaining wall, and also I don't feel we should have to pay for a resolution to the situation.
Okay, well, folks, we've seen the pictures and we've heard from Mr. Faraday. I guess,
Are there any questions that you have?
anybody with questions?
I have a question. I'm looking at the pictures, and I actually drove over there. Are there no storm sewers on that section of street? Is everything on Ellen?
Howard, where are the storm sewers?
Storm sewers are on Ellen Street. If you look, there were some additional photos afterwards. There's one with a silver SUV in it. That one shows two inlets on Ellen Street just before turning the corner onto Laura Street.
So is this
onto
north?
North is to the right in the photo, or past the SUV.
Right.
The
So these
north-
are, yeah, Laura Street would be south of these two.
North, yeah, Laura Street is just around the corner to the south of this one right here. There's another photo looking west from Laura Street, and I don't know if you can see it, but what you see is you see the yield sign for Laura Street at Ellen, and there's a fire hydrant on the other corner. What you have is you have inlets on each side of the street on Laura Street prior to going downhill past Ellen down to the dead end of Laura Street.
So you're
Though-
saying that by the yield sign, there's another inlet on that side of the street?
Yes, there's
Yeah,
an
I think I-
inlet over by the fire hydrant, and then there's an inlet over by the yield sign. And then a third photo is the east side of Ellen Street at Laura. There are two inlets on that side of the street. So all of these inlets that we're talking about, they never existed prior to the 2017 street construction project. Those inlets were installed as part of that project, and they convey the water from this intersection south towards Business 151, underground towards 151. And that never happened prior to this project. There are no storm sewers on the dead-end portion of Laura Street that Mr. Faraday.
The original plan did show those storm sewers to be on Laura Street, and although there are 4 storm sewers that are up on Ellen Street, they do not stop all of the water that runs off from Ellen Street. There is still some water off from Ellen Street that comes down Laura Street. And as I mentioned, that has gotten better since prior to the street improvements, but most of the water comes out of that driveway that's at behind the house at 270 Ellen Street. And it either there's some water that comes down, and before it gets to that driveway, it crosses Laura Street. It runs to the south side of Laura Street, where the curb and gutter curls around to the edge of the parking area. The water that comes out of the driveway will come down. The neighbor, Clyde Halverson, he poured concrete that I realized the city had to match up to. And there's, I'm not sure what you call them, but there's a gutter there that's drivable over. And that water used to run towards the corner of the duplex, which deteriorated the retaining wall. And then that, with what was added at a later date, that little hump there, drive over hump, that Lounger Brothers did approximately 2 years ago. That volume of water is now directed to the east side of the parking lot also. So, and one of the things in there is I had given Adam a thumb drive, is there was a video on there showing the volume of water that at the time I made the video, that little hump there directing the water that came out of the lower end of that driveway, it showed the volume of water, which has since increased since that little hump was put there, because what used to run to the northeast corner of the duplex now runs along the east side of the asphalt parking lot.
All right, well, you have a question?
I have a number of questions. My first question, you have two rental units there, correct?
Got two buildings, are duplexes, each building is a
And
duplex.
the one that you're talking about the most there, that was built in 2012.
Correct.
When was the first one built?
Actually,
whatever number.
the first one we started in spring, 360 Ellen Street was started in spring of 2011, and we finished it in September of 2011, and then over the winter of the fall of 2011 into the spring of 2012, the Lower Street one was built.
Okay, my next question pertains to, I looked at the property in April of this year, and I saw that you had put out netting, so I assumed you had worked at improving or constructing something between the two rental units.
What
Was that at your cost to do that?
What that was that was somewhat unrelated. Last summer, we decided to improve some outdoor living areas with patios on the lower level, and up on the front poured some more concrete also. So with the construction there, and then we removed some landscaping and turned that into a lawn area, grass, and with all that. I basically, we ended up reseeding a large percentage of that area, especially because, as I mentioned before, access is gained through that parking lot area at 225 Lower Street. And that was all completed last fall. I put the straw with the netting down, and already I have a rut. I'm just going approximation. I have a rut about that deep and about that wide, kind of at the lower end, in between the duplexes.
Okay, my next question, clarification. Howard talked about catch basin put up at the top there as far as next to Ellen Street. Do any of those catch basins go into storm sewer that outlets onto the riprap, which is on Water Street?
No,
None of that water
No.
goes down there.
no.
No.
All of that water is collected in underground storm sewer pipes and conveyed south to Business 151.
151. So you have no additional conducting of water from the lower part of Laura Street down to that riprap area. Correct. Okay. Then going back to the history on this, I was called in to look at this, I guess it was about 2015 or 2016,
Very possibly.
And the purpose was to speed up the putting in of the street, the lower street. And so that was accomplished, and my question is, putting in that, did that meet your expectation as far as solving the problem as far as the water? Apparently it did not.
No, I did not even realize they were going to put that riprap in until after the fact when it was done. And so I assumed the city knew the volume of water that was coming down through there. Otherwise, they would not have needed to put the riprap there.
That was another one of my questions. What year was the riprap put in relation to the two buildings?
Riprap was put in as part of the 2017 project.
2017. Okay.
So I assume that the city would realize that there was still going to be water running down there. Otherwise, the riprap would not have been necessary, because there isn't any necessary on any of those, on any rest of the length of that hillside.
And prior to 2017, part of the water from the street that was eroding, gravel and water, was going to the neighbor. That's correct. The neighbor got part of the water.
No, everything pretty much has always been directed towards our property.
But he put a ridge there to direct the waterway now toward you.
Now, but
It goes toward you.
But at the same time, at that time, where that driveway comes out of 270 Ellen Street, at the time, the city shaved off a hump there. There was more of a hump, and that's, I believe, why the city crew didn't want to go down there to plow the snow. And so what would happen is that water that came out of the driveway and anything that came down Ellen Street, which was more of a volume, most of it would go to the south side of Laura Street and then run pretty much in the same area. When the street was redone, there was a little bit of that grade cut out of there, so more of that water that came out of there, so there wasn't quite as much of a hump. So more of that water that came out of there then headed down towards the shop area of Clyde Halverson's, and Clyde had poured cement up at a degree of angle where the city had to meet up with the concrete. So then the water that at one time we used to run across the street, run in the same area, started running out the lower end of that driveway, came through the gutter at Clyde's property, and then would immediately head right towards the corner of that duplex to deteriorate the retaining wall.
Okay, I have further comments here. One thing that has been brought up in some of the council meetings, and this is that the city is responsible for conducting water to a safe outlet. And I'll give us a couple examples here. First one, Deborah Court. This year we're working on Deborah Court. The problem at Deborah Court is that additional water was being received. The backyards of people there were being eroded away. The power line that went through the backyard was moved forward toward the front. So that is one example where the city came in, and this council did, and voted to improve that area as far as where the water was going to be going. So the people there were not asked to put in improvements themselves to correct the problem that was occurring there. My next example is Mineral Street, and one time a few years ago I received a phone call 8:30 at night, Sunday night, from a citizen, and he said that the water was surcharging. Is that correct terminology? Surcharging out of a sewer line, storm sewer line coming from the intersection of Broadway and going through Mineral at a diagonal and coming to in front of his house, and then the water was bubbling up out of the storm sewer and going across his backyard. And so this resulted in the fact that there was insufficient capacity of the storm sewer line on the remainder of Mineral Street and Ann Street, which was the street which was going down from Mineral Street. So the city came in and enlarged the sewer line, storm sewer line, to repair that problem, and that was not a problem that was due to the citizen there. It was a problem that was created by the city, putting in too large a line, going to an area, sewer line, storm sewer line, which was insufficient capacity. Another example I'd like to give is the Dairy Queen. Dairy Queen, a few years back, they put in riprap that goes down onto the Dairy Queen area there. I view that as a repair of drainage. Next example I want to give is a motel. The motel has construction over drainage. Quick Trip, 2 properties. There's drainage going by the drainage there, and I guess one part of this big tube goes underneath the drainage. And last year, we received an estimate from Delta 3 that it would cost about $6 million to put in a prefabricated project to solve that problem from Business 151, I believe it was, up to Pine Street. Now, in the case of Mr. Faraday here, he has a business. These people along this part of Water Street have a business. Are we going to ask the people along Water Street, the motel and Quick Trip, to put in the necessary prefabricated constructed area at their cost, as we're asking Mr. Faraday to do here? To me, this is a project that has, for Mr. Faraday, that is a cost he should not be bearing. There is a situation here that we're getting more water being poured out into areas in the city, and Deborah Court is one example. Another example is Cody Subdivision. That was a number of years back, and the water was pouring out of there, and part of the problem there was that Malone Subdivision did not have enough capacity for its various storm sewers. So the golf course was being affected. The people along that area were being affected as far as water going into their basements, as far as water running through their backyards. This is something they were not experiencing. So we had a meeting on this, and Howard remembers the meeting. Lenny Glass was at the meeting. Lenny is a former council president, and he was very adamant that something needed to be done about solving this problem. And the problem was that we're getting more water because of an increased rainfall, because of change in climate, so that something had to be done. So that's another example. I doubt if the people paid for too much of that as far as correcting that problem. So there's examples here where the city has to come in and solve problems. And I think this is a situation by Mr. Faraday where the city needs to solve the problem. And as I look at it, they should have carried part of that water down to the riprap. Now, you're not going to be able to carry it all in a tube, but at least you can put a swale in there and also carry some of it by surface means. So these are my examples, and I believe that something needs to be done about it. And my question is now, what happens next?
This is on for information tonight, so if any council member has additional requests for information, I guess that would be next. And then my understanding is that this is related to a, I'm not going to get the terminology right. Notice of
It's a
claim.
notice of claim, correct. So
And so the council will be acting on a notice of claim.
Okay, but what I've read so far is that Mr. Faraday did not provide an economic number as to the cost of the damage to his property. Number two, he did not provide a timely report to the city. I thought it had to be within 120 days, is that correct? So that those two things were used to deny the claim of Mr. Faraday. So what happens now if we wait 6 months? Can he put in another claim? And what will that be?
So nothing has been formally denied by the city. So that is where that, I guess, is up to the council as to what direction you want to go. So what is going to happen is this is going to come back as an action item essentially on the next council agenda on the 27th. And as council members, you have the authority to go in a couple of different directions. One is, you've been briefed on, I guess, what the recommendation is from the insurance company as well as the attorney. So if you choose to go in that direction, that would need to be, you essentially would be either determining to continue down the path of possibly having this become a capital improvement project, which then would require some kind of due diligence and working with Mr. Faraday on what those costs would be. And then it's going to be a process just like any other where that'll be in the budget scenario. Or you will look at essentially, because this is a legal process, you would then either, you can do that, or you can actually deny the claim and cite the reasons of why you're denying that claim. And that would be a letter then that would have to be issued by, obviously, the city. That would come from the clerk's office as well as myself signing it, which then would go to Mr. Faraday and his attorney, which then starts a process. Essentially, if that's the case, there is 6 months that then they can formally bring a claim or lawsuit that essentially then would go to court. So that's kind of the direction of what the council needs to kind of decide is what steps and directions you want to go. Is this something that you want to potentially have as a capital improvement project, which then you're pretty much committing that that is going to be the case? Or essentially it's, if you're denying it, what is the reason and justification that you're using for denying it? And that's the information that's been provided to you kind of by the insurance company and by the attorney.
So, for example, if it's denied, then you'd have to bring suit.
Correct.
And that's going to cost money on his part to bring suit. And a lot of lawyers don't want to take a project like this because it doesn't, citizen is set there trying to get money to carry out the project. And frankly, in my experience working with the city and I've seen this example a number of times where the city denies the claim and the citizen is stuck with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I could give you more examples where this has taken place.
Sure. Yep, and so that's the question. Obviously, as council members, you have to decide the direction that you want to go. There's recommendations, obviously, from the insurance company, from the attorney. As the council and as the city, though, you can go in any direction that you want. So you can either go with that, or as you indicated, Ken, if that's the decision that the council wants to look into is proceeding with this further, that's an option then as staff, we can start to do some due diligence on that and look into that. So I think the recommendation I would look at is obviously this is coming back as an action item. I would encourage all of the council members to obviously look at the photos. I don't think there would have been any question. I would bet that Mr. Fair would be more than willing to have any council member kind of look over. It sounds like a majority of you have done that already. But those are some of the things that you got to kind of consider. And then, as we get to that next meeting, that's when the discussion can kind of come into more formal, and you can decide as a council and as a city on what direction you think makes the most sense. 'Cause I think everything's been stated is sound in both directions. So
Next meeting is
the 27th.
July 27th?
Correct.
And is there something on August 24th?
That is the official deadline that we have to respond to the notice of claim. So when it was submitted in April by statute, you have a certain amount of time to respond, which would be the August 24th deadline is when we officially have to give both Mr. Faraday and his attorney the decision that the city is moving in.
Well, these are my comments that I have at this point, so.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Faraday, and as noted, we'll move this item to an action item for the next meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, the next item on our, for information and discussion is a rezoning request for 130 Ellen Street. Joe?
Right, so 130 Elm Street is a single-family home. The applicant regarding this rezoning request is in the process of purchasing it. I think they might have completed that purchase. But they also own the adjacent property at 125 South Water Street, which is a commercial property, has the cash store and Suntan City, and then it's got apartments on the second floor. So right now, those apartments, there's commercial parking along Water Street in the front. There's some parking for the apartments to the back of that building on the east side of the building. But they don't have enough parking for basically one stall for each bedroom, which they would like to be able to provide. So when this 130 Ellen Street property came on the market, they decided to pursue purchasing it. And they'd like to take a portion of that property, approximately 2,500 square feet, to the rear of that Ellen Street property, add it to the Water Street property, and convert or install some additional parking for the apartment building in that area. So it'd be the basically the rear portion of that Ellen Street property. So since right now the Ellen Street property is zoned R2, 1 and 2 family residential, the commercial property on Water Street is zoned B2 central business. Any area that would be added to the business property should also be zoned to business. So the request is to convert or rezone that area from R for the parking for that building to take place on that lot. So the Plan Commission considered this request at their July 6th meeting and have recommended approval. Staff has also recommended approval, although I didn't put it in my note, but it will be there for next time. I think it would be wise to make that rezoning, if you approve it, contingent upon property actually being added to the Water Street property, because if they don't actually follow through and do that, then it doesn't make sense. That's our whole intent behind it, so I assume they're going to do that, but just in case for some reason that fell through, I don't think the rezoning would make sense to do that. So I will update that for the next, so this will be a public hearing and action at the next meeting.
Okay, does anybody have any questions or comments?
I have one question. It said that the parking will be paved.
Yes.
Now, is the person going to put in any curb and gutter so that the edge of the parking doesn't break off?
Actually, they're digging into that hillside a little bit, so they'll be installing a retaining wall.
Retaining wall.
Along the edge of the parking lot.
So around the parking, there'll be concrete, so that it'll be a stopping place as far as how far in they can drive.
Yes. Yeah, it's a
So
four,
that
4 foot high
we won't get
retaining wall.
like some places where they keep on driving into the property
Right.
and they don't stop.
This will be a 4 foot high concrete block retaining wall.
Okay. That's gonna go how much?
Excuse me?
How much will that go around? How far?
My understanding is the eastern edge of the new parking lot.
Only the eastern edge.
Yes.
And who owns the property at 285? And does it go down to the, do they own the property at 285?
No, that's a separate property owner.
All right, so I have a question about, we just heard about water runoff. Is the property on Ellen Street not significantly higher than the property on Water Street in terms of elevation?
Yes, that's
Okay.
that's why they need the retaining wall.
So what kind of provisions have they made for water?
There's an existing stormwater catchment basin in that parking lot for the apartment building that the water will drain.
Right, sized for that parking lot, not sized for 2 parking lots, right? I mean,
Not
it's,
involved in
what is
engineering,
the
so I
sizing? I
can't
mean,
say yes or
it
no.
seems to me like we just heard about a water problem.
Yeah, well, I
on
can
an-
guarantee you one thing, that any water comes out of that parking lot isn't gonna go to the Elm Street.
No,
property.
I know, I'm not
So
worried
it's
about
only
it
gonna
going to that
impact-
property, I'm worried about it eroding this property.
Yeah, it's only gonna impact the applicant's properties.
Right,
if it's
So
not
what-
adequate, they'll have to deal with it on their own.
Except that if the properties behind them are pouring water on them, does that then become a city problem? So what water retainage steps, what water treatment steps do they have to follow as the downhill property? You see what I'm saying? The water, you know, there's one thing I've learned about water. It generally flows downhill.
Look at this they already own the property that's to the west or downhill now, and they bought another property, and it's
Right.
creating this. They're under the assumption and know what's going on, so they're creating. If a problem does be created, they're creating it themselves. So they already own the property on Water Street, which is downhill from Elm Street. They've already got the parking lot there, so they already know what the water is doing now. And if they're buying this, or they've already purchased a lot, it's already transferred, this house on Elm Street. And if they're taking a lot off to create additional parking for their Water Street project and then putting in the retaining wall, I mean, this is if a problem were to come along, it's one that they've created themselves. So if they create a problem, they can fix their problem.
They should, that's right. If you create the problem, you should fix the problem. But is there no consideration for how much water? I mean, I don't know how much water is going to flow off 285. I don't know I don't know the topography. I don't know how much water might come off that lot that they then might say is now eroding their retaining wall. I don't know. Because they're only going to build it on the east side. They're not going to build it on the north side. Is that what I hear?
North side is their driveway, so they can't build it there.
Can't all be driveway, is it?
Well, wherever the edge of their parking lot, they'll have a retaining wall along it where they need to. It'll taper down as it gets to the driveway.
Okay. I'm just worried about the water problem that could potentially exist in, because again, this is an elevated area pouring water down. And Isaac, I understand what you're saying, that they own the property right now at 130 Ellen Street. I think that's what the property that they bought. That's fine. They might at some point in time now sell that property and not, or sell all the properties. So somebody needs to look at the whole water issue there and where it runs so that we don't that another situation isn't created. That in 10 years somebody says, how did this get created?
Estimate the amount of water that's gonna be running off by taking away the grass?
Ask them that. I'm sure they won't know the answer to that question. I said I can ask them that. I'm sure they won't know the answer to that question.
Good bad question. When you go from grass to lot, you need to figure out how much water is gonna be coming off.
Okay, so those are questions that I had, questions that Ken had. Anybody else with questions? I mean, I'd like to know if the storm sewer that's there is adequately sized. I mean, if there's one in the parking lot, is it adequately sized to take twice as much water? Because I think they're going from, one size to twice the size.
And I think this is something that obviously will trigger a future conversation within our ordinance, because if our ordinance currently doesn't require that, there's not much, that puts staff in a bit of a bind, because we can't force a property owner to manage something that technically our ordinance says they don't have to. So I think that's part of this is part of an overall conversation of what is that tipping point that we want to consider as a city where what is the parking lot definition? Is if it gets to a certain point, is it the number of spaces? Is it, those are all questions obviously that we'll have to look at or kind of consider as we talk about, future changes to the ordinance.
All right, there will be a public hearing on this next meeting. If there are no other questions, we'll move on to the 2022 proposed budget timeline.
Okay, so you have that in your packet, and I'll just draw your attention to the highlighted items are the council meetings, and the ones that are marked with an asterisk are additional or unusual council meetings. And other than that, I think it's fairly self-explanatory. Does anybody have any questions about the timeline?
You just added these meetings, correct? I mean, the asterisk one's August 17th,
Yes,
October 5th, and October 19th.
correct.
And
those
so
would
if
be-
people have previous plans, like vacations or whatever,
You need to let us know.
okay.
Yep. Yeah, you'll see one change, obviously, that's on there is, the timeline is a little bit different because we've talked about as one of the goals this year is the capital improvement plan. So you're going to see there's going to be some dedicated meetings that are specifically just to that. And then that kind of ramps up into the first kind of budget discussions, which is the CIP. So as you'll kind of see, we're going to spend the second meeting in August is kind of the introduction to the kind of revamped CIP to an extent. Then there'll be the meeting in September, and then October really kind of kickstarts the first CIP budget process. So.
Okay, so please let staff know if you have conflicts with any of the additional meetings.
Are all those meetings at 6? The additional meetings?
Yes.
Okay.
What does the asterisk mean?
So that's where those meetings are outside of the normal 2 meetings a month that we have. So those are actually a special meeting that will occur.
Special.
Correct.
Okay, again, if you have issues, if you have plans to be away or have work commitments during those times, please let staff know. Moving on to the next agenda item, council rules.
Yes, so this is something obviously that we are not going to spend too much time on tonight due to the fact that we have a work session, but this is something that you're going to see will be on multiple council meetings is my thought process. This is something that I have actually tasked our city manager intern that we have, Ben Bilkey. He's been tasked with looking at kind of 5 municipalities in regards to their council rules. And obviously with the, hopeful addition of another council member, we'll have a full council and kind of start talking through this. But in talking with some council members, there's been some, conversation or question about looking at the council rules and kind of considering whether there would be any proposals or updates or changes that would want to be made. So specifically, Chapter 2 is where in our municipal code, it spells out specific actions of the council and specific rules. So where we really kind of want to do our due diligence is look at Section 2.04, which is the council rules. There are 16 council rules that currently are in existence within our municipal ordinance. So this is kind of an opportunity as council members for you to review those specific particular rules and think about any changes you would like to propose, alterations, etc. So as you'll kind of see in the staff note, all of the rules are very, different in certain areas that it focuses on. One of them specifically talks about officially when the Common Council will convene. So as we've learned with COVID, one of those questions that we need to consider into the future is what is the definition of a quorum? Is that something where the council wants to consider allowing somebody, whether, example, let's say they would be a snowbird where they tend to go, during the months of January, February, March, they have somewhere else that they're not in the city, but they definitely are a resident. Would it be acceptable to the council to allow them to attend by some virtual means or by phone? And then that kind of parlays into some other conversations about the definition of a quorum. Is it that you want to ensure that there is a physical quorum of council members present in the council chambers, or can that be a combination of you've got 2 people that are in the chambers, you've got 5 that are on Zoom or some form of virtual means? So those are obviously things, that are all up for discussion. I know, there's the question, obviously, you can talk about the time. 7 o'clock seems to be kind of the general time that has been established by the council. That's something that can be reviewed. One of the things I've heard from a couple of things is within our current way our agenda is set up, there is the definition of the consent calendar versus the consent agenda. I know that has been something that I've heard has been talked about by council members as potentially wanting to make an alteration or a change there. So again, these are going to definitely be multiple conversations that we're going to have. I intend to have kind of our city manager intern do a presentation for the council in regards to what other municipalities have put into their municipal code in regards to council rules to see if there is anything that the council would deem sufficient that you would like to see added. So I guess the homework that I would kind of ask for the council members is this obviously was a very lofty staff note that has a lot of rules and kind of information in there. So please take some time to kind of review these particular rules and think about any rules that may not be in here that you would like to see. And as we kind of move through multiple meetings, our intention or hope would be that we'll spend the rest of kind of 2021 here looking into any alterations or changes, and then officially try to adopt those by the end of the year, so that we can do our due diligence with any kind of ordinances or notifications and public hearings that would need to be done. There would have to be a public hearing on this. But that kind of is the game plan. So I guess, is there any questions, comments, or concerns with that? Yes, sir.
Are we gonna use Robert's Rule of Order?
So that is obviously one of the rules that you have the opportunity to discuss. So currently right now, yes, we use, in our municipal ordinance, we use Robert's Rules of Order. That is obviously a discussion that can occur if you want to go to a different version or a more updated version, or if you want to have, I guess, less would be another option, is you could consider going to something different. But yes, that is something that will be discussed is, are you comfortable with the current Robert Rules of Order format that we've been using, or do you want to, change it to be an updated version? Something additionally that will all be discussed.
That's my concern as far as what are we gonna use, because I don't wanna be reading something that, we're not gonna use.
Right, and
What's the latest date we're gonna use for Robert's Rules?
yeah,
For example.
so that would be the big question is, do you want to continue to use the version that we've been using, or do you want to go to a more updated version? Again, with Robert's Rules of Order, as the council, you have the ability to create your own rules outside of that. So the way our current ordinance kind of reads is that is the general guideline that we use as Robert's Rules of Order. But obviously there are some abilities within our ordinance that as a council, you can adopt rules that are outside of Robert's Rules of Order, or technically the chair, so in this case, it would be the council president, is considered to be the parliamentarian. So they are the one that, yes, that's right. If you didn't know that, that's you. So you basically right now are the one who is the interpreter of Robert's Rules of Order. And then right now in our current ordinance, if there would be, I guess, a question in regards to that or a debate, the council does have the ability to override that. So that's basically kind of the current way our rules are stipulated. But those are all things that definitely we'll be looking at, and I'll be asking you if you want to make those changes or not.
I don't want to take much time with this, but rule number 1, it
Yes.
talks about adjourned meetings, and in the past, I've been quite familiar with tabled meetings.
Mhm.
You're gonna quit, and so you table it. Instead of using the word adjourned, if you say adjourned, to me it means you're done.
Correct. Right.
Well,
So-
actually, adjourned can be adjourned to a specific time.
So there you got a couple of options. You can either table, it depends on what you want to do. If you want to essentially table the debate of what you're doing and no longer have a conversation, it's kind of a twofold. So you're essentially tabling the discussion and you're not doing anything else and coming right back. Typically what I think in my experience of what I've been here in other municipalities, you table whatever the action item is to the next meeting and then you formally adjourn. But yes, theoretically you do have the ability, per Robert's Rules of Order, you could technically table and adjourn all in the same motion, but that usually isn't done because there's obviously unless it's the last item on the agenda, that would probably be the only time it would be acceptable, but otherwise you wouldn't want to adjourn if there's other things that you want to discuss. So,
I have one more question. This is my last question. Number 14, Rule 14.
yep.
Any member voting in majority to move for a reconsideration of the vote of any question. I've seen this also be used that a person that is absent at the previous meeting can bring back something.
They can. So this becomes a question of how deep in the weeds you want to go with Robert's Rules of Order. So so one of the rules that we specifically have, and I'm trying to remember if that's in Rule 14 or if that is stated somewhere else. I think it's actually in a different section where, well, no, what this is referring to is Robert's Rules of Order essentially says whatever the motion is, so if it is defeated, it cannot be brought up it has to be done by the individuals or the majority of those that made the motion. So it gets really complicated. So technically, if you denied something, the majority that was in favor that wanted that motion to come to be approved, they cannot ask for it to be reconsidered. It has to be done by the party that was the majority of the motion. So that way it can't, if something, if there's a topic and it denies, and this kind of talks about the council as a whole, if you continually want to talk about that topic, you can't keep every meeting asking for it to be reconsidered. The only way that can be done is by the majority voting group has to agree that they want to do that. So that's kind of what Rule 14 kind of talks about. We may need to and that's why I said, consider rewording the rule, as it can be very confusing on the interpretation. So I think
And actually, that's what my question tonight of council candidates was getting at. What actions would you take? Because,
right.
I mean, basically, if the majority votes to go one way, the minority cannot continually say, let's put it back on the agenda.
Correct.
And discuss it again.
But I'm just bringing up a situation of a person being absent.
I think if the person is absent,
So-
the person is just absent, right?
Theoretically, if they are not, the general Robert's Rules of Order guideline is if you are not at the meeting, you are not, you have the ability to do that, but it's frowned upon. So if you weren't at the meeting, you truly should not be making a motion to something that you weren't there for. So kind of the same, it's basically the same thing with abstaining, is you are not required to abstain from a motion, but Robert's Rules of Order strongly suggests that, if there's a conflict or whatever, you should be abstaining. But again, it's kind of, there's not an unwritten rule, so that's a question for the council, is if you want to stipulate that, you would want to put something then in the rules that cements that in stone.
Okay, so this will be on our agenda several times, so I would suggest that people who have strong feelings about any of the rules or want to remove words like a typewritten copy shall be.
Right.
Yeah. Which I thought.
Yeah, Barb, I do have a very strong suggestion. Adam, I talked to you about this, would be to look at the start time and moving it up, preferably to like 6 o'clock. Even tonight, I know we have a work session, and it's already 9:30. And sometimes when we have presentations, it's really overwhelming when it gets late in the evening to comprehend things. I don't have an issue with the length of time, but sometimes the meetings get a little late.
And I think we'll have to think about that in terms of inclusivity too, because I wonder about moving times up to 6 o'clock if then you limit the parents that might want to.
Right.
So that's a discussion, I guess. We used to meet at 7:30. We've already moved up. In case. All right. So council rules, those will be on for the next several times. If you have specific suggestions, send them to Adam. I think, Adam, you can clean up some of the language that says about mailing
Yep.
and emailing and stuff. I don't think we have to have significant discussion about whether we add that or not, but some of the other things. So I think then that we are at the end of our information and discussion items. So now at 9:25, we will go into our work session on ARPA funds, the American Rescue Plan Act.